in any cancer trial, we never put a patient only on placebo. So you will always be on some kind of treatment. The way that it works is that you can either be given placebo plus whatever the standard of care is. So standard of care would be whatever combination of medications you would normally be getting. So we would just give you either placebo or study drug in addition to those medications. We would never let you go on a clinical trial. It would not be ethical to put you on a clinical trial where you get no treatment. So let's say you go on a clinical trial and you're randomized to receive the standard of care arm, but it's actually found that the arm that has the study drug included is better or works better. You can actually be, we call this a crossover, you can be crossed over to get both the study drug plus continue on the standard of care. So this is why we do preclinical trials, in order to do that testing sort of at the bench. And this is what mice models are for. This is where we're actually doing that sort of guinea pig testing, so that we at least know what does the side effect profile somewhat look like, and whether that drug is working or not prior to actually giving it to humans. Once a drug makes it to phase 2 and phase 3, this is really where we're fairly confident that that drug is actually efficacious. So patients were responding. There has been, sometimes in phase 2, we'll do a study and we'll find that actually it didn't work as well as we were hoping, and then it doesn't actually make it to phase 3. So the drug company wouldn't bother pursuing it any further. So if you're nervous about that, I would say that phase 3 studies are the ones where we're really fairly certain about the efficacy, because that's where the drug company is trying to collect that data in order to market their drug. And they wouldn't do that unless they had good data. But if you were nervous about that, then maybe a phase 1 or phase 2 study isn't for you. This is why we have such rigorous testing, both preclinical and then as we move through the phases of a clinical trial. So as I mentioned previously, by the time we get to phase 1, we at least know a little bit about the side effect profile. We know whether it actually worked. And we monitor patients very, very closely in phase 1. Actually, we monitor patients very, very closely throughout any phase of the trial, but especially in phase 1. And there's a lot of extra testing that patients have to do. By the time we get to phase 2, we're a little more confident about what the side effect profile is and that it is working. And then by the time we get to phase 3, we're even more confident about the side effect profile and about how well it's working. Even though the drug hasn't been approved yet, we still, because we go through such rigorous testing, all throughout these phases, it still is as safe as we can make it, and and that's why we do such close monitoring of clinical trial patients. If it's ever found when you're on a clinical trial that you're not benefiting from the drug, so meaning if it's not working, both you and your physician can have a conversation about that, and you can come off the trial at any time. As I said previously, your participation is voluntary, so either you can withdraw yourself or you have a conversation with your provider and you both decide that you want to come off trial. Sometimes, so just so you know, even though you come off the clinical trial and you're no longer getting treatment, you will still technically continue in the research study, meaning the research team will probably still follow you for follow-up for many years after you come off of the actual medication. So there's a difference between coming off of the drug and coming off of the research study altogether. Now, you can also voluntarily withdraw from the entire study if you don't want to be followed. The reason we follow you, though, even after you come off the medication, is for your safety, so that we can make sure if any long-term effects happen that we can follow up on that. When you come off of a clinical trial, just remember there's often some tests that we have to do just to make sure that your organs and everything are still healthy. So we will often do blood tests, maybe a urine test. Depending on the study, sometimes the protocol mandates that we do a skeletal survey again. But these are for your safety, so we do recommend that you do those tests. And then, of course, you can come off of the actual medication. At the time when you finish your end of treatment tests and you go into follow-up, or if you just come off of the clinical trial completely, your physician will also look at what are the next steps, what are the next treatment options, and usually we'll actually explore those before we pull you from a study. We'll kind of look ahead and see what is the next thing that's coming, or next treatment option. Is there another clinical trial that we could offer you, or should we just move to standard of care? And some patients will go from standard of care drug to clinical trial back to standard of care, or they'll go from clinical trial drug to a new clinical trial drug. It completely depends on what is open for recruitment at the site at that time. We have quite rigorous guidelines that are mandated by all of the drug administration regulatory bodies. So Health Canada, the US FDA, and also the European FDA. So we go through quite rigorous testing in order to try to ensure that these drugs are not dangerous to you. Of course, you could have side effects. Of course, there can be unforeseen toxic events. But we always try to at least inform you of these risks. That's what the informed consent form is for. And at any time, if you are not comfortable with those risks, you can voluntarily withdraw from the study. Some patients may choose only to do that in their last, maybe later on in their journey, but just know that you can get onto a clinical trial earlier, and sometimes it may actually be of benefit to you so that you can access certain medications earlier. We have found with some clinical trial drugs that some of those drugs actually work better closer to your diagnosis as opposed to later. However, that information will be provided to you by your provider. You just have to ask them.